Okay, welcome to Monday Night Bible Study. We're back in our prophecy study, going through the book of Revelation. And I gave you a set of notes for the study tonight, and also this one-page kind of a supplement. I debated about whether to go over all of this. I kind of decided not to, but I wanted you to have these notes. If you remember back in the last chapter, we read this verse, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other's not yet come, and so forth. Well, all right, one of the things I mentioned a while back, but I didn't have the stuff together to go over it, is that in the Bible we find a number of kings, or, well, really, they're all kings, that God speaks to directly through one of the prophets. He says, thus saith the Lord, to speak thou unto, the king of Babylon or whatever, and say this. Well, when God speaks directly to that king, he's actually saying something to Satan through that particular king. And it's because that particular king at that time is the one that Satan is working through. It's like the center of his kingdom on earth. It was Egypt, then Assyria, Babylon, and then Greece, and so on. So I think where it says 5 are fallen, and 1 is, I think the 5 that are fallen, we have, and I've got the scriptures here, and I had thought about going over this tonight, but I've changed my mind. You've got the notes when you're doing your own Bible study. Look these up and read them. It's interesting. You'll see what I'm talking about. And this is one of those things that we need to know about that are in there in the scriptures, that when we read like Ezekiel or Isaiah 14, for example, it has, the 5 I wills. How art thou fallen from heaven, Lucifer, and so on like that. But it's addressed to the king of Babylon. Well, that's one instance where God is speaking to Satan through the king that is under his direct control at that time. And I think that gives us a pretty good clue as to who these 7 kings are, these kingdoms, these 7 mountains that the harlot religion sits on. And that's not all at one time. It's these 7 kingdoms that have been one right after another. And every one of these kingdoms has been an enemy of God and an enemy of Israel, and, oppressed Israel and those kind of things. So anyway, I'll just give you that. We won't go through all of that, all those scriptures tonight, unless, but we can keep that before we get through this study. If you want to, discuss any of this at some time coming up, we can sure do that. So anyway, we'll go ahead with our, get into chapter 18, and just kind of take this, a lot of interesting stuff here, but we might, I don't know if we'll make it all the way through this or not. We may come to a stopping point. We're not in any big hurry, but I don't want to just drag this out too long. We've been in this a long time. Of course, Troy asked me earlier, where are we going after this? I don't know. I've prayed about it and kind of, searched the scripture and everything. I don't have a clear direction yet. So anyway, we're wide open for your input. I've kind of got a couple ideas, but anyway, we'll just kind of see how it goes. But if you have any suggestions or anything, feel free. We may just kind of not dive back into some big, long, particular study like this one has been. Maybe to review a couple of things. All right, Revelation 18. Babylon the Great is fallen. I like this cartoon here. Here's Snoopy. Charlie Brown says, I hear you're writing a book on theology. I hope you have a good title. He says, I have the perfect title. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong? And that's something we've got to keep in mind when we're studying through this prophecy stuff. We've got to be real careful about getting so dogmatic about this is, what this means, and this when this is going to happen, and all that kind of stuff.
Where'd you find that?
It was, well, I've got it was in, okay, Bible Eschatology Files at WordPress. WordPress, if you could go to WordPress.com and go to Biblical Eschatology, you could probably find that. So anyway, yeah.
I was kind of thinking that when we get through this, we can do like theology.
Yeah.
You know, discuss it, study it.
Yeah. Some kind of just basic fundamental, theological fundamentals
that people believe, they believe just because it's church doctrine.
Yeah.
They don't know why they believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
Study the theology behind it and see why it got to that point.
Yeah.
I think that'd be real helpful.
It would. It would. Y'all get, put down some notes or something on that, and we'll sure take a look at it. So, did you say the theologians don't know what they're talking about? Wait, are you saying the pastor could be wrong? That's the reaction you get usually when you even suggest. Do you mean the Pope could have been wrong all this time? I think he's figured out, oh man, we were wrong all this time. Yep, they're wrong. And the old thing about, you mean, all these people believe this, and you're saying that all these people are wrong. Well, how many Muslims are there in the world? How many Mormons? How many Jehovah's Witnesses? How many Hindus and Buddhists and all that? Just because a lot of people believe something doesn't make it right. So, John says, anyway, point being that, we've always got to be teachable and correctable and have humble attitudes and realize that, we maintain our biblical baseline of biblical truth, based on solid biblical interpretive methods and, right, dividing the word and those kind of things, but at the same time, not be so rigid on a lot of these prophecy things. I don't know about y'all, but during this study, especially in Revelation, I've learned a lot, and most of it was, this is what I thought in previous times, but I've come to see that really, I don't think that was correct. So, he says, after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. It's one thing that struck me that we keep seeing here, and it seems like it's progressively greater. Here a while back, I think it was in chapter 15, where John says he saw this mighty angel come down, and he was clothed in the sun and had a rainbow around his head, and he set one foot on the earth and one foot on the sea, and had with a loud voice made these proclamations. And now we see this another angel, mighty angel, come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. I'm sure that this is probably during that time when it's dark and and all those things. So it's kind of like God has these angels that are kept in reserve, these with a lot of power and stuff that after Satan has been cast out of the heavenly places and his angels they've all been cast into the earth and they're fighting a losing battle. God still has these mighty angels that nobody's even seen yet. So, and he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen and become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. One thing I did want to say, I forgot here, was that here we see the earth was lightened with his glory. So John sees this. We've got to remember the last time we saw John, he said an angel took him out into the wilderness and began to show him these things. So he's seeing things that are happening on the earth, on the physical earth here. But Babylon has fallen. It's become the habitation of devils, the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Now we can understand, devils, those kind of deceivers of demonic powers, and then foul spirits, maybe like a lower. In these three categories, I don't know if we're seeing like levels of hierarchy in Satan's kingdom? It could be. Because from what people that study demonology say, they say that there is like a class of demonic beings that are very kind of like brutish, like kind of almost animal-like, except they have they're beast-like, like crude beasts, but they have somewhat of almost a human intelligence in a way, and so on like that. So I don't know, but we can understand devils, foul spirits. Now, the cage of every unclean and hateful bird, I'm not exactly sure what that's talking about. Now, we know we've got references back there in Isaiah and Jeremiah. They talk about how, Babylon will be the nesting place of owls and ostriches and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't think, even though those vultures, those birds are considered unclean to the Jews, I don't know that that's really what that's talking about here, since we've got two categories of some kind of evil spirits. I'm thinking that this is talking about some kind of evil spirit, and we know that's what's going on there in Babylon, the city of the harlot religion and so on. And it's called Babylon the Great here because at this point it has finally taken over the whole world. It has finally reached its goal. And this is what the Babylon, the political system and the false religious system, that's what it has wanted to do the whole time. Take over the world. Gain dominance, control over all of God's creation. So it has here. It's become the headquarters for all the devils and foul spirits and hateful birds, whatever those are. So could this be it? I wonder. I don't know. Maybe. Y'all know where there's the Vatican. A lot of people believe that's it. I don't know why, just because they've got this pagan Egyptian symbol standing right up there, the obelisk there, standing up there, and I think it's got a sun symbol up there and all that kind of stuff. And
is there anybody there that's not Catholic, I wonder? Probably
not. The millions of people there.
Wow.
Millions and millions of people. I mean, there's nobody lining up to see me drive my Jeep down the street, and nobody lining up to kiss my big toe or my ring or, I mean, all these millions of people, they're standing there waiting for the Pope to come out of that little window, that little balcony, and stand there. And then they're going, and the Pope's message so uplifting. Didn't understand a word he said, but anyway.
Well, you just think for all the generations that it's been like that,
and
all the different popes from way back then.
All from Constantine. And here's the thing that people don't.
That's why the crowds are there. It's because it's ingrained in
tradition and so on. Yeah,
that's all they know.
People think that the popes claim that they're successors from Peter, the apostolic succession. They come down from Peter. They're not, and they know that. The popes are successors of Constantine, the Roman Emperor Constantine, who in like 313 A.D. Converted Rome. Christianity is going to be the official, religion of Rome, and so on like that. And all of that hat the popes wear, that long staff with the cross, and all that stuff that the popes wear, and all that stuff came from Constantine. So. They are the successors of the Roman emperors in a way. So I don't know. But in a lot of this, with all these statues up around here, that's kind of patterned after the Pantheon in Rome. And you got all this and, all of these statues and all that kind of stuff. And Mary up here. You notice, now here's the Pope sitting down on his throne, but Mary's even above him. So anyway, all that idolatry. Now they swear it's not, but it is. And there's some of the Catholic Bible versions, they changed the 10 Commandments. They took out the second commandment about not having graven images, and they split the 10th commandment into 2 commandments, so there would still be 10. So anyway, you can find those Catholic Bible versions. All right.
Why do they put on Ash Wednesday? Why do they put the ashes on their forehead, the cross?
I'm not real sure. I think it's the ashes represent repentance and something. I'm not sure where the ash. You know, Steve. I'm sure I've read that, but I can't remember. You know, I don't know, but it's supposed to show repentance and stuff. But I'm not sure about the ashes. What that why they use the ashes,
or why they eat fish on Fridays.
Well, it's supposed to be they're giving up certain things. They give up meat. They don't consider fish meat. It's not red meat. You know, they give up red meat, beef, or whatever like that. And it's all part of the works system. You know that it's like doing penance. You know, they're giving stuff up. They're sacrificing. They think they've got to sacrifice themselves to make amends for their own sins. Matter of fact, talking about books, if you want to read a book that will clue you in on the workings of the Catholic Church, I'm reading it right now. I've known about this book for decades, and I never did read it. I finally got around to reading this book. It's called 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Charles Cheneke. And, man, it's a really good book. Boy, it's an eye-opener. And he was a Catholic priest for years and years. And anyway, finally got out of it. But it's all about works, and they have to do penance and make amends for their own sins, and they have to suffer and do without and all that kind of stuff because God's angry at them. And if they don't do something, then God's going to stay angry at them. And Jesus and they tell you it's in their doctrinal books that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was not enough to completely pay for their sins. They have to do something too. And they have to go through Mary to appease Jesus because he's angry at them. And, that's what they're taught. That they have to do something too to, help appease their sins or to make, restitution for their sins.
But so much of that, I mean, my family was Catholic, and bits and pieces that I remember, I mean, like, when you give something up, to me, I always saw it as people who did it selfishly, like, oh, I'm going to give up sweets and sodas and, chips or, whatever.
Yeah.
And then as I later, got more educated, I mean, fasting, but you replace that breakfast or whatever with prayer time, whatever,
Yeah.
instead of, if you're going to fast something, then you're supposed to replace it with prayer, but I never saw that growing up. It was just like, oh, I'm going to, and it was dietary, I'm going to lose some weight at the same time, or, whatever, but it's how they viewed it, or how I saw it being viewed.
Yeah. That's true. That one time a lady asked me, what are you giving up for Lent? I said, hope.
But you're a prime example of, being raised Catholic and doing those things and not knowing, having a clue as to why you did it.
So, chocolate, I'm giving up chocolate. I'm not going to have it till, Easter. I get to have all the chocolate I want, or, whatever, but.
The Muslims do basically the same thing during Ramadan. They don't eat during the day. And when the sun goes down, they can eat, something like that. Give up certain things for a certain amount of times and all that. But that's what that's all about, works and self-sacrifice and all that, so that you can, pay for your own sins. So anyway, hold and cage are basically the same thing. It comes from the same word. It means like a guard place, basically like a jail or a prison cell, a cage or a hold or an imprisonment is basically what that means. So it's we know that a lot of the demonic spirits, the Bible tells us in several places, they've been locked in chains and darkness, and so on. So I don't know if that's kind of what it's talking about there, but anyway, that's where it will become kind of the holding place or the headquarters of all of the demonic spirits and devils and stuff that are operating on the earth. They'll go there. All right. So, anybody ever heard of Mothman? We did X-Files last week. You ever heard of the Mothman? The Mothman believe that people believe the Mothman creature is a demon that lives in a certain area, like the Jersey Pine Barrens and Pennsylvania, parts of Pennsylvania. A lot of, people swear they've seen it, and it's, creepy thing that they see before some disaster happens and so on like that. So, and there are other things that, reasons to believe that some of the demonic creatures take the form of birds, evil-looking birds. And that could be. It's kind of one of those things that we just have to put that in a category of stuff that we just don't know. So anyway. So he goes on to say, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Now, we hear about a secret group who runs the world. This could be it. Because we've got all these world leaders, and they're all in there for this big meeting with who? The guy sitting right in the middle. So let's see. When you see a picture like this, and I read something about this, and there's, political leaders and big business, financial people, and kind of a lot of the movers and shakers of the world. Who's in charge? Oh, let's see. The guy sitting in the middle that everybody's, focused on. And we always hear about the big summits in Rome and all that kind of stuff. Well, there you go. These big meetings there, and all the world, they look to Rome and for Rome's approval and all that kind of stuff. And I think the popes have pulled the wool over people's eyes. So anyway, what's going on now will find its culmination in these prophetic times that we're looking at, and so on. He goes on to say, I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. And, I was thinking about this. We might have talked about it a little bit last week. Notice that no instructions are anywhere given for anybody to try to redeem or reform the harlot religious system. Instead, the Lord commands His people to come out of it and have nothing to do with it. There's some things like false religions, corrupted religions, that we can't change. It's just, not going to happen. The only option is to get out. So that's how it's going to be for any believers that are alive at that time. They are going to have to heed this warning, kind of like when Jesus told His disciples, and the 12 and probably any others that were there listening. He said, look, there's certain things you need to watch for, and when you see them, and it's the Antichrist setting himself up in the temple to be worshipped. So when you see that, get out of the city. Flee, run out of here. Because at that point, destruction is going to be poured out and the wrath is going to come. So there are things that we're not going to be able to reform, and we're not going to be able to change. We just have to have the discernment to know, when we can do some good, and if we can't, then there are certain things that we just have to just get away from and stay away from. It's like some people. Some people are toxic people. You just need to get them out of your life and, don't have anything to do with them.
Do you see this as maybe taking place before the bowls? The final
that's kind of what I'm thinking, because you're going to notice in all this stuff about the merchants that are still rich and the city with all this merchandise and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking that same thing. I thought, if all the bowl judgments have been poured out, and the earth is just almost totally destroyed, everything has come to a grinding halt by then, how are you going to have these merchants and all of this stuff?
It says, so that you won't have the plagues. And at the end of 17, it says, it is finished.
Mm-hmm.
So,
if
it is finished, it's finished.
Yeah. So I'm thinking you're right. I'm thinking that what we're seeing here is John kind of, he talked about, the things through the 7 bowls being poured out. At this point, he stops and he returns for some details. But I would agree that I think this is happening before the bowls are poured out. Because, I mean, the plagues, we know what the plagues are. The plagues coming in the 7 bowls of judgment, 7 bowls of plagues being poured out, you know. So, yeah, I think that's a good point. I would agree with that.
Oh boy. That's the wrong thing.
This is kind of like a final plea
Yeah.
for the people to flee
Yeah.
the mountains, or to get out.
Yeah.
Away.
Yeah. And I think, well, yeah, even if this is before the plagues, we've had the angel flying all over the world, proclaiming the everlasting gospel, warning everybody and all that. We've had, the mark of the beast system and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, any believers that are still around, this is time for them to get out, and separate themselves from it and don't have anything to do with the harlot religious system. Paul said in 2 Corinthians, "Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty." Now, we know Paul is quoting Old Testament scriptures that were spoken originally to the nation of Israel, telling them to come out from the paganism that surrounded them and so forth. But Paul was using this to illustrate what he had been telling the Corinthians to do, which was to come out from the pagan idolatrous culture that they lived in. In 1 and 2 Corinthians, always remember this when you read those 2 books. So, anyway, always remember, anytime you're reading anything in 1 or 2 Corinthians, the main message Paul is telling them is, in helping them to do, is to separate themselves from the culture they're in that is absolutely, totally saturated with pagan idolatry. So anyway, but illustrates the principle of, when there's unclean things and so forth, come out from it, be separate from it. Paul talked about that. I'm not telling you to completely separate yourself from the company of unbelievers, because then you'd have to just go out of the world, and so on like that. But there's certain things we just got to separate ourselves from. Here's the reason why. "For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." He says, "Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double." Now, if you go back and you read some of these scriptures on this supplement sheet, I think they're in there. You might read more of the context that these scriptures are in, because like they're in where I've got Ezekiel 31. You probably want to start at like chapter 26 and read all the way through there. And these are the kind of things, you're going to see when talking about Assyria and Babylon and Egypt and Pharaoh and all these other ones, to reward unto her double that she's, done unto you. Because, that's what they got coming. This is the wrath of God that is pouring out. "How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her." Make sure I don't get ahead of myself. Remember this from chapter 17. "The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled." So here we find in chapter 18, we see the same thing. Therefore, her plagues will come in one day, death in mourning. And this is another reason why I talk about the plagues and the 7 bowls of plagues. This is another reason for the thinking that, and I pretty much agree with it, that the plague, those 7 bowls of plagues, are going to come like one, almost overlapping one another. Those angels, it's almost like the angels are going to, pour their bowls out almost all at the same time. But one pours his out on the earth, one pours his out on the air, one pours his out on the sun, pour one out on the dog. So anyway, and this gives pretty good, and it seems that as we were going through the stuff about the angels pouring out their bowls of plagues, it seems to happen rapidly, and I believe it does, right there, toward the end. But anyway, she'll be utterly burned with fire, for strong is Lord God who judgeth her. And over here we've got that they'll, hate the harlot religion, the whore, and make her desolate, and shall burn her with fire. So these 10 horns that I think are probably 10 Islamic nations that are going to ally with the Babylon system and become the beast of the Antichrist. They're going to, throw off that yoke and just begin to fight and devour each other and burn up that whole system. Jeremiah said this, "Put yourselves in array against Babylon round about, all ye that bend the bow. Shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against the Lord. And shout against her round about, she hath given her hand. Her foundations are fallen, her walls are thrown down, for it is the vengeance of the Lord. Take vengeance upon her, as she hath done. Do unto her." Let's see, do I have that? Yeah. Y'all probably can't read this. It's probably too small. But I think I gave copies of this to everybody. This is from Deuteronomy 32. While we're going through these judgments on the harlot religion and Babylon and all this kind of stuff, maybe, put a note on there. If you go back and read these things, go back and read Deuteronomy 32 at the same time. Because all of these things that are happening to the Antichrist system and Satan's kingdom and so forth, all of those things are back there in Deuteronomy 32. And if you remember earlier in the book, when we were studying through the 4 horsemen, and we saw that these things are going to be poured out, and a lot of them, according to Deuteronomy 32, are going to affect apostate Israel, unbelieving Israel. They're going to suffer these things. But also, God's enemies are going to suffer these things. Right here it says, "I'll render vengeance to my enemies and repay those who hate me, and my arrows will be drunk with blood, and swords will devour flesh," and all of those things we've been seeing there back in Revelation. All that stuff is all the way back here in Deuteronomy 32. God already said He was going to do all those things. And Revelation is the fulfillment of what He said He was going to do back there. So it's interesting. All those things are, they're already back there in the Scripture. So about, her arrows, bend the bow, and spare no arrows, and all those kind of things. Those are in Deuteronomy 32. So these statements are kind of like an indictment being handed down from the highest court that there is, the one in heaven. God is the judge, and the harlot system has been found guilty of every kind of evil crime and blasphemy and murder and extortion and all those things. She's been tried and convicted, and this is her sentence being pronounced and being carried out. And she's going to be executed. So, after all this time, the harlot religion that's been the root cause of all the trouble in the world is finally going to be done away with for good. The kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. Now, I think that by this point in all of this, the Antichrist economic system, the mark of the beast system, will have crashed, and depriving these merchants of their way to buy and sell and gain and corner the markets of the earth and all that kind of stuff. This will be the last of the big great worldwide economic collapse that everybody sees coming. That'll be it. And here's the thing about the mark of the beast system. Just because the Antichrist implements that system doesn't mean that it's going to work. I kind of think the mark of the beast system may be sort of a last-ditch effort to grab control of everything in the earth. And, I just don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to be a miserable failure and just collapse, and especially when all of these judgments begin to happen, it'll fall apart. So, here's one thing. Do you ever think about this? Greed is one thing that even Satan can't control. He can't. His people are just as greedy as anybody else, and they want to grab all they can for themselves. He can't even control greed. So, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all lying wood, and all manner of vessels of ivory, and all manner of vessels of most precious wood, and brass and iron and marble, and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beast and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men. And this is what got me to thinking the other day, that I think John has returned and he's given us details of things before the bowls of the plagues are poured out. Because how could all these things still be there if it's after the plagues have happened? I don't see how they could, because, it's going to destroy all of the trees, all the green grass, and the water's going to be blood, and all the fish are going to die, and all that stuff. The ships will be destroyed, and all that kind of, burning mountains thrown in, and all that kind of stuff. So how could all this stuff still be there? So I'm thinking that what we're seeing here are things that are going to happen, coming into those 7 plagues or right before that. Now, notice we've got here that in all this list of stuff, wood and pearls and gold and silver and ivory and all that kind of stuff, cinnamon and frankincense and all that, everything except for the wine and the oil and the flour and the wheat, maybe the beasts and the sheep and horses, none of this stuff is anything that anybody needs. All this is luxury stuff. This is like high dollar, high price. Even today, this is expensive stuff, So this is not stuff that people have to have, but it's stuff that's high trade items, high marketable items. That these things in these lists are things that have always been traded. For as far back as any historical records, archaeology can show, these things have been the core items of trade routes. Entire trade routes have been set up for that one item alone. The Silk Road and all that kind of stuff. The Silk Road, by the way, is the route by which the bubonic plague made it into Europe. But anyway, all this stuff, this has been the core of kind of world trade forever. And it still is. It will be all the way to the end. If you had gone back in, Abraham's day and gone into a market anywhere, these are the things you would have found. And also slaves and souls of men. You would have found that too. There's still, thriving traffic in humans has been around since antiquity, and it still is. But anyway, all except for these food items. None of this stuff is anything that anybody has to have. It's luxury items, high trade items. He says, and the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. And also, you may notice, a lot of those things listed in there, like the ivory and the wood and gold, silver, and those cloth and all that kind of stuff, those are things that are used in idolatry and stuff. All those things you find in the Vatican, Catholic cathedrals, and a lot of big mega churches too. They're not immune from their own brand of popery. So anyway, go ahead.
You're referencing Jeremiah 50:15. He's talking about her foundations have fallen, her walls are thrown down. Could that be a reference to Jerusalem being torn down?
It could be, because there are references referring to Jerusalem as spiritually Sodom and Egypt and everything. Now, specifically in Jeremiah, he's talking about Mesopotamian Babylon, the old ancient city kingdom of Babylon, because he's writing about when Babylon falls to the Medes and Persians after Israel has been taken captive and the Medes and Persians conquer Babylon, and then Cyrus, king of Persia, releases Israel to go back to the land. So specifically, he's talking about literally the ancient city of Babylon. But now, spiritually, there's kind of reason to at least look for references that refer to Jerusalem as Babylon in a spiritual sense.
2 Corinthians, Paul said to come out of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible he could be talking about the religion of the Pharisees when she came out of it.
Could be. Probably by the things Paul specifically named, he was talking about the Roman system, Greek and Greco-Roman system, by the things that he named to the Corinthians but still at the same time, any of them that were still attached to that system of Judaism, it would have applied to them too, because there's plenty of other instructions where he tells them, to separate out from that.
I was reading something today, and it said in John's Gospel, he's talking to the Pharisees, and in their religion, he's talking to them that you do the work of your Father.
Yeah.
Talking about Satan.
Yeah.
He's talking to the Pharisees then. And that's their corrupted system.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're your father, the devil, and you're the liar from the beginning, and so on like that. Yeah. John 8, I think. John 8.
I see a parallel between Jerusalem and Rome. I think.
Yeah.
Manifested from.
Yeah. And the fact is that apostate Israel will be allied with the harlot religious system. So they're all gonna be in the same bed, So yeah.
See, at that time, Rome would be acceptable, whereas the Pharisees, the Jewish religion, would not be.
Yeah.
It'd be more acceptable as a go-between in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just my way of thinking.
Yeah, I see your point. All right. Okay, verse 16. So the merchants and so on, they're standing afar off, weeping over the fall of Babylon, saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches has come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And cast dust on their heads, and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city! wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Now, here's the reason why I stand on this is talking about Rome. Because this absolutely applies to Rome. It doesn't apply, I mean, Jerusalem is not a, we're talking about a port city here. Yeah. You know, because we're talking about shipmasters and all that, and shipping and all. See, as far as Rome, especially when John wrote this, Rome had a name for the Mediterranean. They called it Mare Nostrum, our sea, because they ruled it. I mean, there wasn't a bit of the Mediterranean that they didn't rule. And Rome fought some really hard-fought battles to gain control of the Mediterranean, not just so that they could control the trade, but to rid it of pirates. You know, they had the Pax Romana there from, well, I don't know, sometime around a little before the birth of Christ up through, I don't know, till 4th century, 5th century maybe. Anyway, and that whole region, the Roman Empire, was pretty much at peace. And anyway, sea trade was booming in that day, but just, you know, the old saying, all roads lead to Rome. Well, all the shipping routes led to Rome too. And it had to be that way because Rome was too big to support itself. They imported, like in the 1st century era, they imported an average of like 680 million tons of grain a year. Just that's a lot of grain. The cargo ship today holds about 60,000 tons, and so that's a lot. I mean, you know, Paul sailed on those big grain ships of Adramyttium and so forth. So that's one of the reasons why Rome went down there and fought and took over Egypt, because they needed the grain. They had to have it. They're going to starve to death without it. So anyway, not only the grain, but they controlled all of the shipping and everything, and became very rich and so on. So it was still that Mediterranean trade route, which one of the kings or monarchs that we have in here is the king of Tyre that we find in Ezekiel 26 through 28. And it's, you know, talking about Satan and so forth, Lucifer. Tyre, during, late Bronze Age, middle, late Bronze Age, controlled all the trade in the Mediterranean. And then when Ezekiel wrote in about the, late 6th, 7th century, Iron Age 2, something like that, Tyre had, made a comeback and was still a major power in the Mediterranean area. In sea trade, they got rich from it. Okay. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. The mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone. I was supposed to split this. Oh, I forgot to put this. We got notes in the... I sure did. I forgot to put this in the PowerPoint. Well, we'll just read it here. Revelation 6:9. Remember when we saw this back in chapter 6? When he had opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? Well, here we find it. Rejoice over her, the heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. So their vengeance came. It just took a little while, but it got there. So anyway, mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Now, there's a lot of thinking that the old original city of Babylon will make a comeback before all these end time things happen. And it's, talking about ancient Babylon. I don't know. I kind of think not. I think the core of Babylon has moved from place to place. Could be one thing that could bring Babylon back, and about the only thing is food. In ancient times, the reason Nimrod was able to build those cities, and he became great, and those cities became great and became kingdoms, was because in the Euphrates and Tigris River Valley, just like down in Egypt, they could grow masses of grain and masses of food, enough to feed everybody and send trade all over the world, and they got rich and powerful because they could grow a lot of food. Now, about the only thing that could bring original Babylon back would be that if somehow the food distribution network, something collapsed and they were able to once again start to grow masses of food over there in those river valleys. That'd be about the only thing that would, bring them back into power. I mean, oil won't. If oil would, they'd already be back to power. They're not. So this is probably, talking about Rome. Voices of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. And no craftsman or whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. The light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Sorcery is a form of mind control. It's usually empowered by some form of witchcraft. Where's Gruffy? Oh, there she is. Sometimes sorcery by the use of, hypnosis type of things. Sometimes mind-altering drugs. You've probably heard of the Monarch program, the Ultra program, and all that by the CIA. The Manchurian Candidate, if you remember that old movie, and so on. There are different forms of mind control that they use, cult-type mind control, and so on like that. And everybody's going to line up and drink the Kool-Aid. It's taking the mark of the beast. That's basically the same thing, drinking the Kool-Aid. But it's sorcery. It's a form of mind control and manipulation that they'll do. By it were all the nations deceived. So she used these things to seduce and deceive all the nations of the world, including the one we live in. Sorry, but the United States does not have favored nation status with God. We're just one more nation like everybody else. There's a lot of Christian influence. But, our nation has been deceived. And I'm going to tell you, I believe that the harlot religion has successfully seduced and deceived every religion and every religious denomination. Every one of them have been taken in by the deceptive system, and to varying degrees. Not that they're completely devoid of the truth, but still, you can have some basic truth and still be deceived about a lot of things. Remember the definition. Wait a minute. I forgot one more verse. In her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. So here's the indictment is handed down. This is the guilty verdict. That she's guilty of sorcery and murder and all these things, and her execution is, being handed down. Remember the definition of Satan's darkness. It's a cleverly constructed set of untruths that are designed to take the place of God's truth by being more appealing to people than God's truth is itself. And that's the tactic that the harlot religion uses and has used all through time.